at the first part of today in a great panel thinking about the why of the U.S.-Japan relationship and actually the broader Indo-Pacific Alliance, and thinking about the strategic alignment between Washington and Tokyo, and also a little bit of some changes in that, strategic autonomy as well. So this panel is going to dive into a little bit more about the how. We often hear about defense tech as a buzzword, but today we're going to try to look at what it concretely looks like when policy, capital, and hardware intersect. So our goal for the next 75 minutes is to move beyond the headlines, and we want to understand, how does a startup actually survive the valley of death in an allied context and be part of our defense institutions? And how are the recent conflicts that we're seeing, including in Iran, which is really the first true AI wars we'll hear about, change what Japan and the US need to be building together? And so our through line today is the move from alignment, which is being updated, as we heard about this morning, to intentional integration of our two forces. And we are joined by three leaders who represent the full life cycle of this shift. Jingo Kikukawa from METI, who provides a view from the government pivoting towards dual use at scale. Michael Brown, who is a leader in the investment world and who saw the shift from the shift toward AI-centric warfare before it was a headline. And then Arthur Dubois, who's a founder building the autonomous backbone that makes these strategies a physical reality. So let's dive into what this means for the next several years of the Indo-Pacific. And we'll do this by looking outside the region to Ukraine and the Iran conflicts, and how commercial technologies are deciding outcomes on the front lines. And we'll talk about how the move from the world of exquisite single platforms to a world of precise mass, distributed, autonomous, and interoperable systems is changing the world. And then we'll consider, in that context, how that only works if there's a foundation of trust and shared ethics. And this really came through in the panel this morning, and I was really glad that that came up, because I think it's a very key issue for us to discuss, and how we can integrate our technology in a way that also thinks about governance, ensuring that the human in the loop isn't just a slogan, but a technical reality across the alliance. So how we're going to run today's panel is each of the three speakers is going to give a short presentation using slides to convey some of the key ideas that we will then discuss together for about 30 minutes or so, and then we will open it up to questions from the audience. And so we have a very robust period, so you hopefully will ask some good questions. So our first speaker, who's going to start us off, is Jingo Kikukawa-san. I will call him Jingo sometimes, even though that seems really informal to all of you who are used to Japan. But he's told us many times to call him Jingo. But Kikukawa-san is Director General of the Innovation and Environment Policy Bureau at the Ministry of Economy, Trade, and Industry in Japan. So why don't you go ahead and start us off?
All right. Thank you very much. And thank you very much for having me today. It's a very honor to be here. Actually, my first name Jingo is my all American friends call me Jingo, and Jingo Bingo as Django and whatever. So it's just call me Jingo. Thank you very much. So I'd like to first, that is disclaimer, because different from my, the Louis Sensei is Louis Sensei conveys a very big presentation than the before us. So, so those two guys, my boss is left as the Akaza, Minister Akaza was for trade and economic industry. And right side is Minister of Defense, Shinjiro Koizumi. Those two boss is actually take, the great initiative to enhance defense industry together. That is a big point, because I think a little bit different from the U.S. situation, because in U.S. the Department of War is taking great initiative to enhance the defense innovation and the industry. But in Japan, now METI and the MOD as taking the jointly initiatives. So as under the Takaichi administration, she actually put the 17, a little bit too many, but key sectors and also 8 cross-sectoral challenges, and those highlights are I'm taking the responsibility of those 4 areas: quantum technologies and also defense industry and tech-driven nation and startup ecosystem. Those 4 as I have to take responsibility for those areas. So that is a kind of a little bit so busy, but that is a draft made by METI and MOD to how to enhance the defense startups. So we really would like to introduce this DAP type and SBIR, and then so the government would like to make a demand for the startups, and we would like to do the procurement from startups and regarding the defense technology. So we are going to put a lot of the programs for it. And actually, maybe the Luis already mentioned, we actually revised the framework of defense equipment transfer. So we are now at any kind of restriction. Of course, we have to take care of those equipment transfer properly under the exchange trade law and export control law, but we actually abolished those restrictions. So we are now free to export our equipment to overseas. So under such situation is we are doing is kind of global circulation of talent. So we actually received a lot of the American startups. So I think the Sky deal is one of the successful leading case in Japan. Sky deal is of course the AI drone, the startup, and they established their branch in Tokyo, in Japan. I think one is 1 year ago or something, and then so they doing a very good business, and also NTT is using their technology to check out all the facilities of the telecommunications with using their drones. And also under the program GSRX, using the $30 million per year, well, we are sending our young talent to not only U.S. but some, the lot of the flags in the panel, and so we are sending our Japanese young entrepreneurship to those countries. So as under such challenges, we are now having a lot of the VCs and accelerators from the United States, but not only the United States, but from the Asian countries, Singapore and Europe. And so I think as soon as another American big VC should be coming to Japan. So it's a little bit confidential, so I put it a question mark. So as and also, we set up J Startup program. We checked the 268 Japanese startups as well. Actually, it's kind of the endorsed by the government. And this is one of the very promising Japanese defense startups. Well, we are a little bit behind the aerial, the drone, but we are a maritime, the nation. So we are very now good at the water, sea drone. That is a very good coming. And maybe we are now, and also under the Ukraine, we have a lot of experiences about the Ukraine's reconstruction. We put a lot of the startups we sent a lot of the startups to help out their reconstruction with using their technologies. And also, I'd like to give you the one example. That is a Ubitas. It's AI and cloud startups, but that is a Taiwanese startup. but they decided to establish their branch in Japan, R&D center. So under their effort, so we put a lot of the subsidies to them, and then so we are now having a very good collaboration with Ubitus and the Taiwanese startups and the Japanese. So I think that kind of cases, I think, is having a lot of the significant signals to us. So I really would like to strengthen the U.S.-Japan alliances. So and another example is last year, my team established the quantum computing testbed near Tokyo. Under this international quantum collaboration, actually we purchased the quantum computer from the U.S. American startups, QERA, that is a Harvard-oriented startup, but we purchased their quantum computers. They're actually neutral atom type quantum computers. So that is the final messages. Last year, we organized Expo in Osaka, and at that time, we organized a big event for startups. So that was having 10,000 attendances. So this year as well, we're going to have this Global Startup Expo in October in Osaka. So I really would like you to come to Osaka at that time. Thank you.
Thank you very much. One of my colleagues had the opportunity to go to the Global Startup Expo in Osaka last year, and he told me it was a really exciting event, and I hope I'll have a chance to go this year as well. All right, so thank you. So the next presentation we have is from Michael Brown, partner at Shield Capital, who's also the former director of Defense Innovation Unit. And I think this is exciting. He's going to share some insights he has of how what we've been seeing in the last couple months in Iran is really the first AI war. So, Michael.
Well, thanks so much. And thanks so much for having me. I think before we talk about Iran, if we kind of zoom out, I see the period we're in as a confluence of four major factors. One is the world is a much more dangerous place since Putin invaded Ukraine, and now we're seeing wars in several parts of the world. That doesn't look like it's changing anytime fast. Second, the technology that's developed by commercial companies, which many of us knew Ash Carter was talking about 15 years ago, we're really seeing that come to fruition. And I'd say Ukraine was kind of the first proving ground of seeing a lot of commercial technology that has an impact on the battlefield, not just at the sidelines, but getting closer to the center of what's happening. And you see that through space-based sensors, which allowed the U.S. intelligence community to forecast accurately that Putin was moving in Ukraine. You saw it with drones. That's probably the most prominent example. But you also see it with AI, and you see it with cyber. So a lot of these commercial technologies now are proving themselves there. Third, a lot of investor interest. Because the commercial technology is seeing more applicability, you see a lot of investors like the firm I represent, Shield Capital, that are investing in this space. Over $200 billion has been invested since the beginning of the decade in what's called defense tech, which was not even an area a decade ago. No one was investing in anything that was defense-oriented. And fourth, and very significantly, our own Pentagon is now at the forefront of acquisition reform, a very arcane topic that could take the whole time period here. We won't get into it, but really moves to get, there are a lot of moves from a budget standpoint and a process standpoint to get more capable gear to warfighters faster. That's what it's really all about. And this administration has really taken the lead on that. A lot of ideas that have been talked about for a decade, and we worked on in the Defense Innovation Unit. Now the leadership is calling for implementation. I was just talking with General Raymond about that during the break, and we're excited to see that. So if we kind of zoom in and say what's happening in Iran, I think this is the first time you could really say this is an AI war. And it's because of a system that the Pentagon's been working on for a decade called the Maven Smart System. Now, Palantir has really been the integrator to put this all together, but this effort really started with a number of different vendors. It started with computer vision. In fact, there's a book on this that I'm reading right now called Project Maven, if you're interested in reading about this. It was really trying to distinguish when we have satellite imagery, why should we have analysts looking at every pixel? Why not have machines do that? And computer vision has gotten better, so you can actually start to distinguish among targets. And then the Maven Smart System takes a lot of different sensors from space, radar, other sensors, and puts those together in one operating picture. So I've got basically under one pane of glass all of these different sensor inputs, and then Maven goes further than that to say, okay, and I've got capability in place, different payloads, which are types of missiles, and geography to cover. What is going to be the best way to get, what I need to deliver to the target in an optimal way? How do I take advantage of what I know and not have to calculate all of that manually? So that's what the Maven Smart System is doing. It's really a very significant piece of technology, and it's what's allowed the U.S. to prosecute so many targets. So 1,000 targets a day. That would have been very difficult to do without a lot of people, and the estimate is that we can do it with 20% of the people. There are problems with this. There's some data here that was reported publicly from the Pentagon that the accuracy isn't what it needs to be, 60% overall. I've got some sources I've talked to recently say that number is very old, and I would guess that's the case, but it was the last data that I think we've got from the Pentagon that's reported publicly. So what that means is we need to make sure that testing is done for the capability of the system. Every technology has limits. We need to make sure that the Pentagon's working closely with the vendors to make sure that the capability matches where the technology is and how do we make that better. So that's why I say it raises urgent questions about ethics and targeting accuracy. AI we should implement as fast as possible when we're talking about back office, or certainly if we were in a defensive position, if we're defending against a drone swarm, yes, we should be using that even if we're not sure of how accurate it would be. But when we're talking about offensive targeting, that's a different issue. And you might remember the school that was hit, an elementary school in Iran, the very first day of the war. That's not an AI problem. We fed it the wrong data. So data was coming into the Maven Smart System that was dated, and that could have been caught by AI if there were more cross-referencing. So cross-referencing what was coming in the Maven Smart System with Google Maps and listings in the local language of what's where, that could have caught that. So it just shows that we need to continue to improve these technologies. So AI has gone beyond the targeting, which we talked about first, and it goes to other parts of what's happening. Putting autonomous mass on target, which is what we're doing primarily through drones, and then interceptors. So new technology being applied to how do we get low-cost interceptors to deal with incoming drones. One of the things that I've been talking about for years, and now I would say is getting popular under a variety of different names, high-low mix, is the hedge strategy. We've got to complement our exquisite systems, which are very expensive, and we don't have enough of them, with a lot of smaller, unmanned, low-cost, attritable systems. So I think this is the biggest trend we're going to see in defense technology over the next several years. And commercial technology is a key part of this. And the great thing about commercial technology is it allows interoperability with our partners. So this is why I think we need to be doubling down there to make sure that our partners have access to that too. And the fact that it's less expensive means other militaries can afford it more easily. So key takeaways, AI is now central to warfare. You're seeing it in practice here in Iran. Precise mass is the future. Using these lower cost ways of delivering effects are going to be the way the military is trying to make its effects felt across the world. And this also implies cost. A big problem is, as you've already seen, sending expensive interceptors to which are missiles like Tomahawks and other things like that cost millions of dollars to intercept these drones that are tens of thousands. That doesn't work. So all of that points to the fact that we need the hedge strategy and implementing it as soon as possible. And it also gets us to implement what we call multi-domain command and control. So how do we control much more than sea, land, and air? It's also cyber and space. A lot of exciting things happening in terms of technology and defense these days. Thank you.
Thank you. Before we turn it over to Arthur, I just want to ask you just a quick follow-up, which I think will help segue also to Arthur. But you talk about this hedge strategy and the more exquisite and versus more mass of weapons. To the extent you see there's a bottleneck, do you think that bottleneck is that we don't have the right technologies right now for the autonomous mass, or is it the procurement culture?
Yeah, so it's two things. It's procurement, and unfortunately we do see some change on that. The right high-level messages have been sent, but we're waiting to see that being implemented. Still today, only 1% of the defense procurement budget, $200 billion in the U.S., is being spent on the new technology from venture-backed startups.
Oh.
1%. And two-thirds of that is taken up by SpaceX, Palantir, and Anduril, all key vendors. But it just shows the huge opportunity there is for other vendors, great setup for you, that we need to bring in and be using all of that capability. So that's one piece of it. And the other is the ability to scale these technologies with our industrial base. We're so far behind. We're behind on munitions, but for these new technologies, we've not placed the demand on the vendors to get them up in volume. So it's those two things that are kind of in our way.
Yeah,
the technology's here and proven.
Yeah, an industrial base is where I think Japan is a big player, which we'll talk about.
We should be working closely with allies to help solve that.
Okay.
Shipbuilding, munitions, drones, et cetera.
Exactly. So let's give Arthur a chance to share a little bit about what he's working on. I think we've teed you up well enough with the hedge strategy, but please share what you're working on.
Yeah, and before I jump in, I'll say that I agree with your statement. We are seeing intent, we're seeing motion. There's still sort of a frozen middle layer that is struggling to adapt to what the new reality has to be in order to excel in the current climate. But we're Great Arrow. We're building low-cost airlift, so logistics, think cargo, for distributed logistics. I'm from a logistics background. I believe logistics is core to not only commercial operations, but of course any military organization that wants to be successful. When we started the company, we really looked at the Indo-Pacific theater. Of course, Japan is dead center within that. We started a bit with looking at what is the kind of problems we're going to have to solve in the logistics space. And a key one is distance. I mean, we're talking thousands of miles. It's incredibly difficult to actually quickly carry cargo thousands of miles. You can't do that with a small drone. You can't do that with what you're seeing today in the battlefield or even in commercial operations. If we don't have logistics, everything breaks down. It's key to the first island chain strategy that we've talked about here. And so we started really thinking about what is it that can bring affordable mass and low cost to that problem in that theater. So we built this. This is called the Lifter Light. It's an evolution of a lot of the small drones that you've seen, but a fair bit bigger. It maintains this DNA of cheaper, simpler. It is an autonomous cargo aircraft that can fly multiple thousands of pounds for multiple thousands of miles, take off of unprepared runways. It's designed to also cost under $1 million at scale, and that is a 2 order of magnitude drop compared to what we're seeing today. And that is really owing to simplicity and also owing to the fact that it's autonomous. You don't have humans to protect. You can simplify the platform, and that cycle perpetuates itself into better and better, or lower and lower cost, really. We started looking at, we're a dual-use platform, so we look at commercial pretty heavily. Japan has always been an area of very large interest for us because there's a lot of movement of cargo. There's a large economy that needs to be serviced. There's also 430 islands, almost 100 airports in these islands. And so we see ourselves as a low-cost opportunity for logistics, whether that's e-commerce, but also even supply to remote communities. We're seeing a lot of issues in that in Japan, in the US, and elsewhere. And so we really started looking at our platform as a way to get to much cheaper, much more nimble air cargo networks. And then, of course, we've talked a lot about defense. The core problem in defense logistics is the cost of the platform. I don't know if my numbers are exactly perfect, but I think Japan has about 40 cargo aircraft. That is not a lot. Each of them probably cost over $100 million, if I had to guess. Again, I don't have exact numbers. We're seeing this play out in Iran in dramatic ways, right? We're losing billions of dollars worth of platforms to low-cost effects. One of the radar aircraft that was destroyed out in the airfield in the Middle East was a $700 million platform for one single aircraft. No government in the world can actually sustain this. And if we look at a near-peer conflict, looking at China and in the Pacific, this is not the same game as Iran. We're going to deplete, we're going to lose our resources if we don't act now. So what we're offering is effectively a dramatic reduction in cost, a dramatic increase in volume. We know our platforms aren't perfect, but that's not the goal in this new attritable mindset. So we can be the augmentation, the high-low mix strategy when it comes to cargo. And that's what we're building.
Very cool.
Thank
Very
you.
cool. Yep.
Thank you very much. Yeah, my day job, I'm a partner at Jurassic Capital, where we have the Alliance Fund, and we're an investor in Grid Aero, and we're just super excited about the company and its capabilities. And one thing that I find really interesting about Grid Aero is you saw the slide that showed Japan at the center, and Arthur's building his company with the Indo-Pacific theater in mind and solving the problems that the U.S. military has, which is an exact overlap with the problems that Japan has in the theater. And I think that's one of the things that's really important in what we're seeing in the defense tech realm. I'm just curious, Arthur, if you had to pick what's the priority for the biggest strength of the aircraft. Is it its autonomy, or is it that it's attritable?
I think it's incredibly difficult to dissociate the two. You can't have attritable without autonomy because the human life is precious. We would never venture out and build a system that is that simple and that bare bones if we didn't have the luxury of losing it. And so we're effectively accepting that every once in a while, one of these aircraft will go down over water, right? Like, we're very careful when it comes to not running into populated areas. But I don't think you can dissociate the two. And this is where I think we've seen an inflection with autonomy. And this is effectively the unlock for this entire industry that we've talked about. They come hand in hand.
It was a little bit of a trick question. So. Okay, so
Sounds like you passed.
What I want to talk about now a little bit is about sort of the integration piece and adoption. And Mike, you even said earlier that we have the technology, the invention is there. It's really about deploying it, which is difficult. Part of that is the defense industrial base, part of that is procurement. And a lot of it is the challenge of a small company. You pointed to how hard it is for a startup to cross what they call the valley of death and become a successful company with a customer in the government. So I'll start with you, Kikukawa-san, and Jingo. Okay, Jingo. And can you talk a little bit about what METI is doing to help these non-traditional players like Arthur's company become part of the Japanese defense ecosystem? And that's startups. You've talked about it a little bit already. It's startups in general, but then also U.S. startups. How do they become part of the Japanese ecosystem?
So as METI already appointed 268 startups already, but those are the Japanese. But I think it's a little bit my personal view, but I'd really like to expand this J Startup program to maybe my team will establish the J Startup defense or something. That is a new category. Oh. So as I like to welcome this kind of program is from the world, because I explained this Ubitus, that is Taiwanese, but they already set up their R&D branch in Japan. So in that case, we are able to, in some extent, we can give you some, grants or, as some visa priority or something like that. So I think is with Ministry of Defense, my team is now discussing with the Ministry of Defense to set up the new category of the J Startups defense. So that is, well, I think, acceptable for the, especially our, friends, American startups. Very welcome, I think.
That's great. And it's a great program, the J Startup. It does provide a signal for investors as to some of the companies that have gone through some rigor. And getting help with visas, getting some infrastructure will help startups trying to come to Japan. But ultimately, it's about getting a customer. So, Mike, you were involved in getting the DIU going. So do you have any advice for lessons learned that can save some time for Japan about how to help bring commercial startup technology into the government?
Well, what I learned about acquisition is it really is three interlocking processes that are tied at the hip. The requirements process, where the military spends time telling the market what it needs.
Right.
Very important if you're building a submarine, not so important for a drone or AI software. Fortunately, the Department of Defense has said we're stopping that. So the JSIDS process, we're putting to bed. Good. The next is acquisition. So there are different types of acquisition vehicles. The one we pioneered is something with a boring name, Other Transaction Authority. It allows you to do something different than federal acquisition regulations. So I would look to whether you can create, if you don't already have it, an alternative that goes faster than most militaries are required to purchase things using a pretty robust but cumbersome acquisition system. Every military I've seen has that. But we need some workarounds when we're not buying a submarine or an F-35. So that's a third. And probably the most important, budgeting. So here's where I learned that the military is not able to buy what it wants. Our Congress determines that. So unelected staffers on congressional committees are telling the generals, here's what you're getting. Thank you for your request. Now, sometimes those correspond. You requested this, you're getting this. But a lot of times, there's differences. And the differences are political because we're trying to satisfy jobs and districts and things like that. So the budgeting process is actually the most important to make sure the military has the flexibility to quickly buy what it needs, leverage new technology, address current threats. In the U.S., the budget starts 3 years before the military gets the money. So how could you possibly have known 3 years ago what would be available? That's a complete mismatch. We'd never do that in corporate America. Say you're going to lock into a budget 3 years in advance, and oh, by the way, it has 1,700 line items, and each one of those is broken into a color of money. So that straitjacket prevents us from buying the most current tech. So to the extent those are things you're dealing with in Japan, hope you're able to develop some more flexible, agile systems.
Yeah, let me.
Sure. And while you're finding your slide, I'll just mention that really ties to the point that we heard this morning from Ambassador Schiefer too. Like the big primes have a very sophisticated strategy where they have congressional support that ties into that whole budget process. And it's very hard for Arthur to do that kind of work in Congress.
Yeah, I'll maybe add something interesting to me, which is that if you divorce the money too far from the warfighter, there's very, very quickly disconnect, because when it gets to the warfighter, it's actually kind of interesting. There was an opportunity we didn't get selected to. I'm not going to share details, but one thing that stuck with me is, at the end of the day, it's almost like you're going to a restaurant and you're not seeing the prices on the menu. So you're saying, of course I want the lobster and the filet mignon and whatever else, right? And I'll take the most expensive cocktail on the menu. You're not seeing prices, right? And it's a little bit of an analogy for what we're seeing right now, where we come in and folks within sort of the overarching organization look at technologies like ours as cost reduction strategically makes sense, great. But then the warfighter sees an alternate proposal, and of course it's better than us. What they don't see is that it costs 100 times what we're proposing, and so we're doing 80% of the work for 100th of the cost, whereas somebody might be proposing 100% for 100 times more expensive. And because of the way budgets are broken down and the way acquisitions work, there's no reconciliation of these sort of competing objectives.
That's a good point. Jingo.
Yeah, well, so this slide is showing what we are thinking about with Ministry of Defense. So as Mike, you point out a very good, crucial is the point about, you said the commercial is very important. So that's why the METI and the MOD is jointly try to advance the program for the technology. So of course the MOD is try to establish their SBIR type R&D grants, but at that time also we have to see what is the commercial demand for that. So I think that's why the METI and the MOD jointly make this kind of the program. So, and also is agile and flexible procurement is very important. So we really like to learn what happened in Ukraine and Iran, and also actually there is a little bit confidential, I don't know, but well, actually our Japanese drone startup went to Ukraine to see, what's going on.
How it works, yeah.
Yeah, and with Teladrone and they also works together with the drone companies in Ukraine and to get a lot of data and skills, and so I think that's kind of the collaboration is also very important.
That's great, thank you. I do want to kind of shift the conversation a little bit to something that Victor talked about this morning, about the importance of and the opportunity. He really framed it as an opportunity to look at AI safety, AI guidelines, AI ethics, and this is so important when we're thinking about defense tech. And at a personal level, I just think there's so much to learn and to develop, and so I really want to kind of dig into this a little bit. And I'm going to start with you, Jingo-san, because the government of Japan has been passing policies related to AI and has, I think, stepped up and been a leader within the G7 and within the region. And I'm interested if you can, since we're trying to drill down a little bit more on the commercial input to that, like how does thinking about AI safety help accelerate innovation? How does it help companies? And how are you thinking about your AI guidelines from the Japanese government point of view?
A couple of years ago, under the Kishida administration, actually some Altman, OpenAI, the founders of OpenAI, they came to Japan to see our Prime Minister Kishida at that time. And why some Altman came to Japan as first destination of his global trip, because Japan is very friendly to AI. Because if you ask the Japanese what they think about AI robot, and then we are very, they say, yeah, AI robot is our friend. Because we have a lot of the manga, anime characters, the Dramon and the Tetsuo Atom, those kind of things, Atom Boy. So as not only the image, but also the legal framework is also very friendly in Japan for AI. For instance, the copyright issue is very free for AI data set. And so, but at the same time also, we have to make a kind of balance between regulation and freedom of the usage of AI. And so that's why the Prime Minister Kishida at that time at the G7 leaders meeting, he took the initiative to set up the Hiroshima AI initiatives to set up the kind of guideline for not only users but also the makers, producers of AI. So now, as last year, we actually implemented our AI basic law, which is kind of regulate AI producers and the AI users to follow the international the rules or guidelines, those kind of things. So, so that framework should be revised, day by day. So, but I think now under the Kishida administration a couple of years ago, I think we took as a great initiative at that time.
That's great, thank you. Mike, as an investor, how do you think about this? When you're looking at a company to invest in, do you think about where they are on this journey of AI safety and ethics, and talk about that a little bit?
Well, as an investor, we're primarily looking at the ethics of the leadership team, because nothing you can put in place as a regime counters that. So the integrity of the founders is paramount for us. We're looking for people who are going to do the right thing. But these issues of AI regulation happen at a bigger level, right? This has to be the government stepping in. No one company can take responsibility. And I think we need to be thinking, all technologies have a downside, and we need to be thinking about what do we want to put in place. The government doesn't move fast enough to catch up with the technology, so there needs to be a collaborative relationship. So I'd love for the federal government, rather than saying, we're going to regulate the hell out of you, like it or not, or go as fast as you can, we're going to completely step away. Neither of those approaches is right. So the government really should be developing a collaborative relationship. This is kind of illustrated with what the Pentagon just went through with Anthropic. I think we got exactly the wrong answer there. We need the benefit of all the technologies in the military, and we need to make sure we're taking the time to understand what the capabilities are we doing the rigorous testing? And that could best be done collaboratively with the vendors. So just rejecting them is not the right answer, and saying we don't care what you think about the capability, we'll determine that, that's not the right answer either. You never do that with a new fighter aircraft. You want to know what the manufacturer thinks the aircraft is capable of. So
Right.
we need a more evolved way to deal with this, and it's a very important issue.
And as you talk through it, it just gets that much more complicated if you think about then that technology being exported to another country. And Arthur wants to be able to sell his aircraft to Japan and to other countries. So Arthur, as one of the leaders and founders of a company who has all this responsibility, how do you think about these issues as you're building your technology?
Well, first off, I'll say it'd be really, really good to have sort of a scale or a standard or something we could follow. The worst piece for us is the indecision, right? It's not having a standard. We can't afford not to have one, and it needs to come together quickly. So that's me off my soapbox. But in terms of the way we approach AI, we try to box it, essentially, in a way that prevents it from acting out of certain bounds that are controlled by non-AI software. And so it's really our approach is to try to use AI for what it's good at, which is being creative relative to traditional software, but never really put it in the control seat of what we do. Partly because of a lack of standard, but also partly because we still see a fair bit of hallucination and issues with AI technologies today. So, in a safety critical application, and in a lot of military applications, I don't see another great way to do this, which is putting guardrails around what AI does today.
Yeah, and I would imagine, I was thinking back to Mike's slide about the targeting accuracy that was seen in Iran. I just imagine there's such a gap between the training environment and then the reality when you get into an operational environment, that creates so much uncertainty anyway when you're deploying a new system. But then when you have this black box of AI, it's quite frightening. I'd like to turn, we're going to go to questions from the audience pretty soon, but I want to just bring in some geopolitical issues as well. And maybe I'll start with you, Arthur. And when you're thinking about the future of your business and the supply chain, how do you think about geopolitics? How does that affect what you're envisioning for the future?
It's a massive piece for us. And when we think about component selection, we look very, very closely at where everything is coming from down to the metals. There's a couple critical issues right now in aerospace, specifically if you look at the supply of aerospace engines and the criticality of that supply chain. So we've specifically chosen a path that is probably slightly less optimal when it comes to performance, but a lot safer when it comes to supply chain for critical components. So that is actually one of the biggest questions that I wrestle with day in, day out, because we look at every single component and it has to be safe from a supply chain standpoint. And then the second thing is our design has to be versatile enough, and we have to assume that any one piece of this aircraft is going to stop showing up through the supply chain, and we have to be able to swap up with another. So I would say those are the two components on our side for that.
Yeah, very important. Mike, how would you add to that kind of framework as an investor thinking about the geopolitics and when you're looking at companies' successful outcomes?
I think it's pretty difficult to predict what's going to happen. So we're looking for companies and management teams that are agile. That's agile to deal with political changes, tariffs, or what have you. But it's also to deal with changes in a single marketplace like the U.S. So the most important thing from an investor standpoint is the management team going to listen to feedback and be able to pivot? Are they agile enough, curious enough to be responding to what's happening in the marketplace? So that also extends to geopolitics. What I just make a political comment, so not representing Shield Capital here, it's crazy to me that we're not figuring out how to work more closely with allies right now to build the industrial base we need and have a very tight block between all our allies and be isolating China. China and Russia are the adversaries here while we get distracted with everything around the world from Greenland, Cuba, Iran, on and on and on. Those are the existential threats, and we need to be figuring out how do we collaborate with our allies and put the hurt on those folks, not militarily, but economically. We're missing a huge opportunity to coordinate our tools of economic statecraft to be making our allies and ourselves more prosperous and isolate those regimes.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I think, one of my colleagues talks a lot about, one of the ways you deal with some of the geopolitical issues is first in the companies to really make sure they have to think about their dual use capabilities.
Yeah.
And Arthur, you had a nice slide that showed the military use case as well as the commercial use case. And that I think is very helpful for some young companies to have both options. So as things change in the world, they can look at the commercial sector as well. So my question to you, Jingo-san, is, for companies like Arthur's, we've talked about how they get into the Japanese government system, but what advice would you have for companies like Arthur's that are looking at accessing the Japanese commercial sector? So.
Right, that's a good point, because we need two different demands for not only for military demands, but also the commercial demands as well. And as I explained about quantum computing testbed in Japan, why I purchased one of the quantum computer from the American startup, because interoperability is very important to strengthen our alliances. So because without interoperability, we cannot work together. So that's why we actually, not only from the American startup, but also we actually use the IBM superconductor type quantum computers. So those different type of quantum computer were purchased by government to set up the testbed to create the new software for quantum computers or encryptions, detect technology software, something like that. So I think it's within alliances with like-minded countries, I think we set up such kind of interoperability by procurement with not only domestically but also with like-minded countries. That is important. So that's why I said maybe JStartup program should be expanded to JStartup defense,
Right.
including not only Japanese but some other American or friends startups.
Yeah, and the example of the Taiwanese company is a
exactly.
really great example. All right, so we're going to go to questions from the audience. So if anyone has a question, please line up at the microphone and we'll take your question. But I realize I should have, I'd like to hear a little bit more about the regional piece, because I think that is really, really important. And, this question any of you might want to answer, but thinking outside of the U.S.-Japan alliance, what are some of the trends you're seeing in the Indo-Pacific region that could help with solving some of the problems we're talking about right now?
Okay, me?
Sure.
Well, actually now as our Prime Minister visited to Australia to expand our not only military but also the commercial, including the critical mineral, the strategies. So I think it's Quad and Asian ASEAN's group of, I think that is our very good friends there. So was I explained previously, we actually revised the transfer, the defense equipment. So we are now will be free to export. So I think to strengthen our interoperabilities with such, alliances with not only U.S. but also our ASEAN friends.
Yeah, I think the vision of some cutting-edge technology from the United States being incorporated into Japanese technology that can be sold to Japanese military, but also to Australians or others in the region is the kind of building together that we should be looking for.
And also, I think Japan is still, I believe Japan is still good at the manufacturing, engineering, technology. So it's now not only we are now facing not only the software era, but also the hardware era. So I think we need to manufacturing a lot of a bunch of drones and marines, aircraft. So I think it's such engineering and manufacturing ability is very, very important now.
Yeah, I definitely hear that from the startups that we talk to that are interested in Japan. They're very interested in that manufacturing reliability and capability. So we have a few questions, so why don't we go ahead and invite the questions.
Thank you for panelists for the informative and stimulative talk. My name is Hidedori, working at Deloitte Japan, and I have a question to Mr. Kikukawa. So about J-Startup. Before that, let me briefly introduce to the audience about this policy. This is very unique policy. Government, especially Japanese government, is always neutral and equal to the private sector. But this is very unique policy. When the METI launched the J-Startup, many people said, this is not equal and neutral. The subsidy and the service is first come and first service basis, and subsidy and they will select some METI's pet venture by competition basis. When I heard that, I remember that, many people become crazy. But this uniqueness makes the J-Start policy so successful. So reflecting the progress of the J-Startup policy, so how do you think that?
Okay, well, I have a lot of the consultation with the Ministry of Defense people because they don't know what the startups are. Because, well, I'm sorry, but Ministry of Defense is always talking with the prime companies like Mitsubishi Heavy Industry, the IHI, the Kawasaki. And so I think they need to get the knowledge about startups. So that's why they need to get promised startups. So in that point of view, I think is very our J-Startup program is very useful because METI endorsed such around 300 startups. So we are now introduce them to ATRA and the Ministry of Defense. So they are start discussing with how to get the knowledge and technology from the startups like ourselves, such drones technologies. So I think that is going to be workable, I think, in the near future.
Thank you for the question. And I think you're right. It is surprising, and it's hard for a government organization that's used to being equal, not picking a favorite, not having to choose. And of course, not all of the ones that are selected are going to be successful. And so that is also risk-taking that maybe the bureaucracy is not used to. So good question. Next.
Hi, yeah, this is for Michael. It's kind of a question about exquisite systems and technology transfers. The Peacekeeper missile had the most accurate guidance system, inertial guidance system ever made. And I'm kind of wondering, it's older than I am, if you could kind of adapt things from older, like legacy exquisite systems into both current exquisite and low-cost technology. I mean, it's been around and it's old enough. We should do something with it. It was never used.
Yeah, so I don't know the specifics about that missile system, but you do have examples of taking existing technology and adapting it. I think if I remember right, I heard a story about one of the SM missiles, I can't remember, 3 or 6, that was adapted for the Aegis system on ships. Is that right? I'm looking at HR, who knows far more about this than I do. But so I think there's an opportunity to use older technology, but often the designs are more expensive, use older components. I mean, you probably heard this crazy fact that of all the systems being used in Iran, everything was at least 15 years old, except for the Lucas, this knockoff of the Shahed drone. That was the only new platform there. So, and that speaks to, because it was a knockoff of an Iranian design, you have to start with some new designs that take advantage of lower cost elements to really get a low cost, highly manufacturable system. So while I think there's probably opportunities that we just mentioned, the bigger opportunity is start with a clean sheet of paper. And now we see so many startups that are looking at low-cost interceptors, munitions, that are really taking the point of view of if it's not going to be scalable to be produced in very large quantities, thousands, hundreds of thousands, we're not going to reach the price point that we need. So I'm really excited about what I see there. And of course, that's going to be much better value for the taxpayer and gets much more of what we need out to warfighters.
And I think Japan has a lot of expertise in sort of advanced manufacturing and 3D manufacturing.
Completely.
And I think that could be really game-changing as well for a lot of these companies that now can have a more resilient supply chain, even print parts as they need to.
We're also looking to how do we take advantage of the global spending in defense. Every region of the world is now expanding, and part of that is maybe they can't rely on who they used to rely on, but it's driving a tremendous boom, and people want to be able to sell worldwide, not just to one market.
Yeah, that gets back to the building with interoperability from the start, which is really, really important, I think. So, Josh?
I'm Josh. Thank you so much for taking the time to chat with us. It's been great to hear from key stakeholders across the entire defense tech ecosystem, from policy to VCs to startups. So coming from all these different verticals, surely there are instances of conflicts of interest. And so I'm curious, well, actually, Professor Chow mentioned this earlier, right? Like, not everything's about the bottom line, not everything's about profits. And so, you know, I'm sure this is particularly relevant when you get into the government sector and cross-border collaboration. And so my question to you is, what are these conflicts of interests? When do they pop up? And then how do you go about addressing them to ensure incentive alignment between, you know, the U.S.-Japan alliance, VCs, and startup?
Great, thanks for the question. Anyone want to tackle that? It's a tough question.
I'm not seeing lots of conflicts in this space. So everyone's trying to figure out how to get more capability, how to get it faster. I'd like to see more collaboration with allies. We've already talked about that, but I don't see that as a conflict. Maybe the biggest conflict would be we have to rethink our ITAR regulations. The State Department's kind of controlling what can go to different countries. Maybe that made sense in the Cold War, but it doesn't make sense in today's environment. We need to be helping our companies export wherever they can. Obviously, if there's, you know, some technologies that could be extremely sensitive, but we need to rethink that and make that as small a list as possible, not as big a list as possible.
I'll take a crack at it. I do think we're seeing some conflicts emerge between the capabilities we want and the regulations we have in place, specifically when you look back at regulations that have been around for a really, really long time that are rooted in perhaps legacy technologies. There is an inherent push-pull between trying to push forward technology, and we see it with the Palantir platform, right, where we're trying to push this forward, and then other folks might start to ask, okay, but what guardrails do we have in place? And we see it for aircraft as well, right? There's standards for aircraft that cost $200 million and carry 200 people, and now when you start to ask, okay, well, I have this attritable machine, whether it's a small drone or my drone, which is a little bit bigger, well, how much is enough? And on the one hand, you might have regulators that are just pulling for safety, which is not a bad thing at all. But on the other hand, you have the government and specifically war fighters like, well, I'm about to go fight a war. I got to be ready for this. And so we're seeing some of that. I don't know if it's a conflict of interest or more of a push and pull, but it is very real, and it's very important, in my opinion, that at the policy level, we make a decision in terms of where are we going to put the bar for some of these systems, whether they be AI or drones or else.
Well, Neither, as also I don't see the any kind of the conflict of interest so far. But well, actually, recently we revised the principle on overseas transfer of defense equipment. So if the U.S. startups can come to Japan to set up their branch and to, you know, with collaboration with our Japanese manufacturing companies and to set up their you know, defense equipment. So, and then if U.S. startup would like to export their products to some other countries, and if some, you know, opinions are different from, you know, between the U.S. and Japan, I mean, because alliances, of course, U.S. and Japan, we have the very, you know, strong alliance, but if talking about some other Asian countries, maybe we have a little bit slightly different position to some countries, maybe. So in that case, maybe we should be facing some conflict, I think. So I think it's before that, I think we should discuss deeply to how to manage those kind of the conflict, I think. That is very my personal view, but maybe that could be happen, I think.
I think another area that it's not conflict of interest per se, but it's a natural tension is for both of our countries, you know, the promotion of our domestic industries and reluctance to buy from another country when you want to be promoting your own. And I would think many really faces this challenge of getting that balance right between promoting your own domestic industry and understanding where there's capabilities from the U.S. startups or defense industry that accelerate your opportunities, but don't do it in a way that puts your industry at risk. And I don't know how you, I would imagine part of how you work on that is your partnership with MOD, but maybe you want to speak to that.
Well, a little difficult to explain, but well, it's talking about, for instance, the capability of the production is was I explained this water drone. That is a very unique case for us. That startups, Oceanic Constellations, that is the first, the MOD, Ministry of Defense, found this startup. That is good. And then they put the R&D, the budget for it. Then MOD introduced this startup to METI. It's very, very unusual case.
Yeah, it's good.
Unusual case. And so we found this also is very good because this oceanic constellations can be used for the, you know, the searching the any troubles around the windfield electric power station. So as that's kind of the dual use. So, but for commercial demand going to be very huge. So we ask a lot to these ocean constellations, but also at the same time, the Ministry of Defense also request a lot to them. So that's kind of the limitation that happened. So it's so collaboration is in the view of commercialization and also defense demand is very difficult to be managed.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I think even for the DIU, you know, figuring out how to bring Japanese technology in is hard. I mean, it's hard enough just to bring in the startups, and so then adding the, you know, buying from another nation is a challenging piece. So, thank you. Are there any other questions from the audience? If not, I'm going to go ahead and just do sort of like 2 closing questions, and then we'll get everybody to lunch. So the first question is just to ask each of you, you know, briefly, it's a little bit of a lightning round, kind of the magic wand question. So if you had a magic wand and you can change some policy or something that will allow faster and more effective technology collaboration between our 2 countries, what would you want to change? I'll start with you, Arthur.
I mean, I think for us, it's quite difficult to decipher the ecosystem, specifically for military in Japan. And so certainly it would be incredible to have an organization like DIU who's willing to place bets on technologies. And that would certainly streamline our access to the ecosystem, I think.
It's a great one. Mike?
I mean, the lifeblood of these young companies is contracts. So how could we be working with our governments together to figure out how to give more contracts to technology like you've shown here? So if we could, it's pretty difficult for us to even do that in the US, but if we could figure out how to collaborate between the two countries and get out more contracts that starts building the industrial scale for these startups, we would be increasing our security and our economic prosperity at the same time.
Great. So DIU in Japan, more joint contracting. How about you? Magic wand.
Well, as actually, as tomorrow, I will visit to DIU.
Great.
That is the answer.
Good.
Good to hear.
Well, yeah, I like to as kind of the making the kind of, well, actually, I really like to send our colleagues to DIU to learn more about, DIU type and procurement style and DARPA type, R&D.
That's excellent.
Tomorrow I will be.
That's great.
So that is answer.
Suzanne, to your point, the vision we had for DIU, I don't know if it's still in place, was we should be sourcing tech from all over the world when we open up a competition. It shouldn't just be the US, and I know we had something like 15 different countries participating at the time I led DIU, so that when we qualify something, go through that process, that should be available to all our allies. So thinking of how do we source and how do we sell, that can be better for everyone.
Yeah, absolutely.
And also the last year, I had a guest from DIU and in Tokyo that they visited to my office, and then they show which small and medium enterprises are so important for quantum computers, because the supply chain of, especially superconducting type of quantum computers, they need a very complicated the devices and small parts so
Cooling.
those parts are cooling, and those are the parts are made by the very, very small and medium Japanese companies.
Absolutely.
So they point out, I didn't know that, very with shame, but they know that. So
Phenomenal ecosystem.
That's kind of a good collaboration. That's why I decided, well, I need to collaborate with the DIU.
That's great.
Yeah.
That's fantastic. All right, so the last question for each of you, lightning round before we close, is give us something optimistic, something you're excited about when you think about the future. What excites you the most about the opportunities?
I mean, the pace of technological change is, to me, beyond anything we've ever seen. And that spells lots of opportunities, not just for defense, but how we are operating in our society. So the productivity improvements, yes, we need to make sure there are safeguards, but the productivity improvements are truly vast and amazing. Yeah. Anyone who spent time with Claude and tried to write something themselves, it's amazing. You don't have to be a programmer anymore. You can ask this, intelligence to do things for you. We're entering a whole new era. We're just at the beginning of it. I think it's very exciting.
All right, I'm feeling excited. Arthur?
I mean, the bullish scenario here is phenomenal, right? I mean, if we play this right, we get to reclaim some of our time. No matter what we decide to do, and different folks have different opinions. But certainly we should think of a world where we have less work to do, and maybe we spend a bit more time on other projects and in our families. So that is something I'm genuinely optimistic about.
Fantastic. Jingo-san.
Yeah, well, actually, Mike mentioned, I was so surprised. You said only 1% of the defense budget is go to the startups. It's so surprised because American is you have the very huge ecosystem of the startups, but even though just only 1% of the defense budget goes to
That's how
startups.
hard we make it for
Yeah,
companies like
exactly.
What there's
exactly.
doing, yeah, it's
So
really
as
interesting.
well as so I have this kind of the confidence as because now we are you actually MOD and the MITI will launch the the program for the startups to enhance our defense industry soon, and we finalize our the plan at the end of this year. So I think that is a good starting point, and because our defense budget is going to be around $100 billion, so it's of course compared to U.S. defense budget, I think that is a small, but it's kind of quite amount. So I think that kind of budget should be go to the science and technology to enhance not only defense demand, but also you mentioned the commercial. The demands also is there. So that's why I think is that our such collaboration is very, very important. So
Great.
thank you very much.
Thank you for that remark. I think when we think about the alliance or in the past, it's always been about protecting what we have, but this has been a great discussion, I think, about what we can build together in the future. So please join me in thanking our panelists.